My 17-year-old son was catcalled 3 separate times this week while we were on vacation. Nothing explicit or gross, but definitely clear catcalls. We laughed it off but started thinking, this isn't common, is it? Should he be upset? To be clear, he wasn't offended. I wasn't offended. It's a double standard, yes, but let's call it what it is. Story 1. Riding my road bike, I stopped at a light. A black woman shouted that my backside looked like 2 juicy hams. I pulled in front of her and twerked. She honked. Good fun. Story 2. I tried posting this question to Ask Women, but it was removed for various reasons. The moderator even said, women aren't really known for catcalling people. Edit. The moderators just approved the post. No one has ever experienced catcalling, and it is being downvoted heavily. However, the post remains. Story 3, going on a run. Every time I have been catcalled, probably 3 or 4 times total, it has either been car horns blaring followed by unrecognizable words as they drove by or someone saying, woohoo, nice, while I was running on a beach. Story 4. Common? No, but not unheard of. Should he be upset? That is for him to decide. But I would be more flattered than anything. It has been more than a few years for me, but I just smiled, waved and said, sorry, I am taken. Story 5. My favorite moment was riding my new Harley-Davidson Road Glide when a cute blonde woman shouted, give me a ride and I will ride your face. She was probably drunk, but I found it amusing. If I were in my 20s, I might have accepted the offer. I made the mistake of helping my friend at his college bar and was overwhelmed by attention from women that night. Women can be just as forward as men, especially when alcohol is involved and you're wearing a cowboy hat. Story 6. I was at a benefit golf outing. At the time, I was active duty National Guard and there for work. In uniform, a slightly intoxicated older woman, probably in her 50s or pushing 60, grabbed my ass when walking by. Then a minute or two later, she attempted to grab a handful of my genitals, which I was able to swat away. It has always been my policy not to hit a woman first. Generally, that applies to men too. Fights are rarely worth the hassle and risk. I will not initiate a violent encounter. But in this case, she was one more sexual assault away from being punched in the face. Does that count? Or are we talking strictly verbal? It happened a few times. Usually, if the woman was attractive, I pursued. Otherwise, I ignored it. One time that stands out prominently in my mind, I was either 18 or 21, just before or just after my first 3-year stint in the Army. I went to the gym and stopped at a convenience store on the way home to use the ATM. Walking out, a truck full of girls in the back went wild toward me. The driver, who I assumed was one of the girls' boyfriends, sped off when the light turned green. That was the only time I have been catcalled by a whole group of seemingly attractive girls or women, 5 to 6 of them. I cannot begin to tell you how much it stroked my ego. This all highlights how most of us are pretty hypocritical. If that older woman were a 22-year-old pretty girl, I would be glad for her to grab whatever she wanted. In fact, I have been in that situation too and would not call that assault. That truck full of attractive girls talking about wanting to do lewd things to me made me feel great. But if it were a group of 300-pound, 5'3" women with cigarettes hanging out of their mouths, I would be repulsed. Story 7. I was leaving the mall on a weekday, so there was basically nobody there. I was about to get in my car when I heard a woman yell, "Daddy!" I stopped and looked over because who says that in the middle of a parking lot? The same voice then yelled, "You look so sexy right now." I couldn't even tell you what she looked like. There were 2 or 3 clustered around the car. They got in right after. I was utterly confused as to why they found a skinny man wearing khakis, a short-sleeve shirt and tie, and a hat so appealing. Story 8. As a lean Latino with long wavy curly hair, it has happened pretty often. I am a server at a steakhouse and have had women call me Poppy and other names. One time, after finishing a run outside, I put on my backpack while still shirtless, and some women came up to me and took a picture with me. It never really bothers me and is generally pretty funny, but there have been times when they have groped me, which I was definitely not okay with. Story 9. Sent my girlfriend to the entrance of her all-girls dorm about 30 years ago. A group of them were pressed against the windows shouting all sorts of naughty words. It happened every time I came to pick her up as well. There is a guest waiting room, and a few of them would just go in, walk past me, and then run away giggling. Story 10. I'm not horrible looking. I go to the gym 6 days a week, and a woman has not openly hit on me since 2009. I have no idea where all these men in this thread, who cannot go for a run without being catcalled and chased by women, live, but I suspect it is not the real world. I live in a city of 5 million. I pass at least 10 men running every morning and another 10 to 15 every evening. I have never seen one catcalled. Story 11. I was running once and a woman yelled, "Hey, nice ass." I hope she said that and not, "Hey, you need to get an ass." I have been working on my legs a lot in the gym, so maybe the former. Story 12. I don't catcall them, but if they are running shirtless and look good, I watch for a long time and have my thoughts. The thoughts that go through my mind cannot be said out loud. I have a 23-year-old son, so I really don't check out younger guys around that age or slightly older. It just reminds me of my son, and I can't. Story 13. I was walking with my brother when I got a drive-by where she shouted, "God damn, you were looking good. Can you be my daddy?" He did not believe that stuff like that actually happened to me until he saw it. Story 14. Yes, in college when running shirtless. It was fairly common among both men and women. The group of people and their choice of words influenced whether I thought it was sincere or not. I usually just laughed. If it seemed sincere, I was usually flattered. In general, I think it can feel quite different for men than for women. Story 15. A few times, a drunk girl slapped but once when I was on guard duty at work. Older women sometimes did it when I rode my bike. Story 16. I was never catcalled. Not even sure I was ever clearly hit on by women. One time I was hit on by a woman, which made me very excited, but then she said it was for her friend over there, who was a man. I was still flattered, but that is the closest I can remember. My guess is your son has some serious looks and confidence. Story 17. I wanted to ensure it did not happen again, so I dropped my pants. Good news. It still has not happened again. In other news, I did not know we still had men's-only prisons in this country. Story 18. I can comfortably say I have been catcalled much more than I have ever catcalled others. Here are a few that stand out. Once, while walking by a construction site, I was catcalled by a woman construction worker. Figures, I guess. Another time, while walking across the campus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, I was about in my mid-20s, and a fairly attractive woman closer to 40 openly propositioned me. I wasn't interested. In a bar, while using the men's restroom, I was approached from behind by a drunk girl who asked if I needed help holding that. I politely declined. Does that one count? Story 19. I can count on one hand the number of times that it has happened, but it has happened to me. Each time my reaction is something like, "Did she just? To me?" Cool. Story 20. Woman here. For a man to be catcalled, he has to be pretty handsome to get that kind of attention. My ex was in the top 5% of handsome men by looks, and he got catcalled, harassed, assaulted, and in his words, looked at like a piece of meat his entire life from when he was way too young to well past middle age. To be honest, he never seemed to like the attention, and it did make him uncomfortable. Story 21. I was 18, fresh out of high school. I worked out daily and walked down the road shirtless with all the confidence in the world. 3 women drove by and yelled, "Yeah, I liked it," but they did not turn around, so that was that. Story 22. When I used to go out to the bars, I would get catcalled and occasionally groped by strange women. Some women really like the cowboy look. Story 23. I would assume it was either a troll or a dare by friends, or directed to someone else and move on with my day. Story 24. Back in the 1990s, running without a shirt on, women driving by would catcall or honk all the time. I thought it was funny and saw it as a confidence booster. I can understand why women do not like it, though. I do not look like that anymore, so I would not run without a shirt now. Instead, I would probably just hear dry heaves. Story 25. Once a carload of girls drove by, and one leaned out the window and yelled, "You were hot," at me. I felt pretty good. I did not really have any time to react other than to look longingly as they drove away. Story 26. I had an obviously drunk, much older woman, probably in her mid-60s, slap me on the ass. I yelled, "What the heck?" And she slurred, "I just had to tell you, your ass is pure poetry." I was at the state fair with my cousin. I was 16 and he had just turned 18. Story 27. The ladies at the nursing home told me I am handsome when I visited my grandmother. My response was to thank them and take the candy. Story 28. Usually it happened and was over so quickly that I couldn't really react. I mostly felt surprised and confused. The main ways it happened were 1. Things shouted at me by women in passing cars that I could barely or couldn't understand, or that were unintelligible shrieks or whooping noises while I was walking in the late afternoon or early evening. The same, but drunkenly slurred by women on the patios of bars while I was walking by. Story 29. When I was in high school, we had some made-up awards given out by the theater group at the end of the year. They gave me the Bubble Butt award, and all the girls were catcalling me as I went up to accept my award and shake my tail feathers. Story 30. One woman was caressing my shoulders and back to get the right size when I went shirt shopping for a formal event. I was 19 and she had to be about 40. Looking back, it was definitely unusual, but she was attractive. Story 31. There was a humorous article in a women's magazine a few years ago. A woman in New York City planned an experiment where she would catcall men, thinking she would show them how it feels to be catcalled. The results were amusing because the men were thrilled. For example, a woman said, "Hey, nice body," and a man responded, "Thanks, I've been working on my glutes." They appreciated the compliments on their bodies. The difference is that women often feel threatened because a man who is bigger and stronger is sexualizing them for existing, and the comments are often vulgar. Men do not feel physically threatened by women, and her catcalls were basically just compliments on their bodies. Story 32. Occasionally, yes, especially at parties or clubs. It was highly amusing to the point that I often forgot where I was going in the first place. It neither scared me nor turned me on, but it definitely made my day due to both the compliment inherent in it and the sheer ridiculousness of it. Story 33. If you let them know he is a minor, they may second-guess ever doing it again. Edit. I got downvoted, but I feel if the genders were reversed, I would be upvoted. Funny how society works. Story 34. If neither of you is bothered, I would just let it go. Research shows that people are happiest and healthiest long-term by delaying sexual activity until their mid-20s, but 17 is old enough that he can understand some of these things. Of course, that is largely because boys have less to lose from sexual activity. My response might be different for a girl. Story 35. Light squash gray lavish cough plants stupendous expansion familiar shocking. Story 36. When I was around that age, I was catcalled by some older women. They were older compared to me at 17, probably in their mid-30s. Yes, they had clearly been drinking. Story 37. Worked a 24-hour shift at a factory as a teenager. There was an all-female team doing quality control on the product floor who would catcall me all the time. My seniors would joke about how popular I was with the transgender people in that group. I was also catcalled in empty convenience stores by the cashiers. They would get flustered when I finally had to go to the counter to pay. The worst experience was when I lived in a small town. The customer's favorite restaurant had outdoor urinals. The waitresses would come by and loudly ask if I was masturbating, usually yelling loud enough to startle me and nearly make me miss. If I can get away from the situation or if it is awkward flirting, it is not so bad. Sometimes it is meant to tease, but I am not fond of that. Story 38. I was putting weights on my leg press machine at the gym. A woman passed by and said, "Slow down, you will be drowning in attention." I laughed and answered, "Thanks, I am taken." Story 39. I was with the Canadian Rangers when we were called to active duty for forest fires. This was in 2017, when all of Williams Lake was evacuated in British Columbia. Even after the local threat was over and we started moving to operations further away from the city, we were still housed in either the city hall or an old school. Some of the local women were quite aggressive. They would come to the base and hit on troops. I would get catcalled while walking off base. The commanding officers forbade us from fraternizing with the locals. The Rangers are not the fit young regular forces troops like the infantry and engineers I was posted with. I was a bearded, long-haired, semi-civilian who was there for local area knowledge and predator control. We were the only ones allowed to have rifles off base. Even so, it felt pretty good to get that kind of attention, but it was also kind of confusing. Story 40. Twice. Once changing my shirt on the side of the road and once rollerblading without a shirt on. Both times, I just assumed they were being sarcastic and basically teasing. Story 41. I got wolf whistled on my first day at university from a window in my halls, but did not catch who did it. Later in a bar, a woman came over and admitted it was her and her friend. I did not really say much about it. We just had some drinks and spoke about other things in the end. We dated for a couple of years afterward. Story 42. I was frequently catcalled in my teens and early 20s, usually while running shirtless. Story 43. I have seen many catcalls that I thought were directed at me, only to realize a moment later that they were trying to get my friend's attention. After it happened twice, I never questioned it again. He is the rugged cowboy-looking type, and I am the overweight guy he hangs out with at work and after work. If you define, "Hey fat ass, go exercise," as a catcall from women, then yes, I have experienced this on multiple occasions. Story 44. Two of my friends and I, probably 17 or 18 years old, were walking around town when a car full of college-aged women drove past us, slowed down, and barked at us. They circled the block and passed once more to holler and said something along the lines of looking good before they drove off. Story 45. Circumstances. Either elderly and intoxicated or teenagers trying to appear wild and crazy in front of their friends. Response. Just keep walking or find an excuse to leave the dinner. Story 46. In the summer, most evenings I go out running and often take my shirt off. Having a car full of women honking or calling out something is a semi-regular occurrence. I usually just laugh to myself and keep going. Story 47. A couple of times. Once at school, once on the way to a prison visit by one of the guards at the search station. I did not say anything either time, but honestly, I was pretty pleased. Both made comments about my bum, so I guess the tight, provocative men's trousers work. Story 48. I worked in nightlife for several years and was fairly regularly catcalled and even groped a few times. I would often lean into the comment and make a spectacle of it, sometimes asking for another and another until they became uncomfortable, or maybe give a compliment back and carry on. It just depended on my mood. Story 49. Yes, in my teens, about 5 times until the age of 20. I thought it was odd that it stopped when I actually became an adult. But whatever. Story 50. It happened 3 times. Twice when I was younger, both in summer, and both involved a group of women in a convertible car. I was walking down the road, and they called out. I laughed with them, and they drove off. The early 2000s were much freer in that respect. It helped that I was in great shape, and it was still acceptable to wear vests and tank tops casually back then. The other time was more recently while I was out on a jog. I ran past a group of women outside their house. It seemed like they were having a party. They made a few jokes about me running in the wrong direction. I laughed it off and continued my run. I found it funny, and I was probably feeling confident for the rest of the day. Story 51. Once I was standing outside a mall smoking a cigarette. A girl was walking with her mother, and she looked at me and said, "Oh my goodness, boy, if my mama wasn't here, I'd take you home right now." Then she and her mother laughed and went inside. Another time, when I was around 15, I was bagging groceries at work for an older woman who asked me about some chocolate cubes. I said I was not a big fan of chocolate. She gave me a strange look and said, "Because it depends on who's giving you that chocolate, honey," then winked at me and left. A few random women have run up and grabbed me. My response was to ignore it. I did not really know how to respond. Story 52. I was catcalled a few times by women as a child or young adult. I cannot remember many specifics, except walking past a girls' school and hearing, "My friend thinks you are sexy," a few times, and strange women yelling to me from cars as a teenager. I awkwardly ignored it. Story 53. It happened to me 3 times that I can remember. Every time was when I was around 18 years old, and it was just girls yelling out of a car as they drove past like cowards. Story 54. I have never been catcalled, but when I was 18, I was dating a girl, and we were at her mother's place watching a movie with her mother and her mother's female friend. My girlfriend and I were on the floor, and I was rubbing her back while we watched the movie. I turned to grab my drink, and both women were staring at me as if I were a piece of meat. I swear I could have had sex with all of them in that minute. It is the closest I have ever felt to being an object instead of a person. Story 55. A few years ago, I was running and passed by a couple of young women, who I guessed were around 20. One of them called out, "Oh yeah, work that body," or something like that. I laughed it off. Regarding the double standard, I suspect if the average woman was catcalled once every couple of years, she would also just chuckle at it. Unfortunately, for them, it happens once every couple of days. Story 56. New person in class, neighborhood, or work, between 15 and 45 years old, usually feeling dumbfounded. During massive events, women get catcalled and start catcalling men in response. I think it is usually a power move. Story 57. This past Saturday, my wife complimented me while I was dressed in nice pants, a shirt, and a blazer that is her favorite. Story 58. I do not know. Sometimes I get laughed at for how ridiculously ugly I am, but I have never been catcalled. Story 59. I had an 80-year-old patient with dementia say, "God damn, you are handsome," in front of her 2 adult daughters during the admission. I ride the high of that compliment to this day. Story 60. It happens that you just shake your head and go about your business. Probably has not happened to me in a decade, but in my late teens and 20s, it happened regularly. Make sure he is prepared for women who may try to touch him if he goes out to a dance club. It is awkward and not enjoyable to be groped by drunk women when you are a young man. Story 61. Once, after I finished watching a movie with some friends, a car drove by, and one of the women inside asked for my number. I shouted back no because I could not see them, and I thought it was funny. Story 62. I once got catcalled by a carload of girls while out jogging. I yelled back, "Dream on." They seemed to enjoy that, so they pulled over to chat. However, after they saw me from the front, they left about a minute later. Apparently, I look better from the back than the front. Good times, I tell you. Story 63. I just smiled and waved. Honestly, I almost always assume they are joking or something. I am fine being part of someone's joke since I am a big fan of self-deprecation humor, so I just go along with it most of the time. Story 64. Once, I think. Mostly, I just felt confused. And to this day, I don't know if her calls were directed at me. My reaction was, "Is she talking to me?" Confusion. Most men are confused when they are catcalled or hit on. It doesn't happen to us, so we have no idea how to react when it does, and usually can't believe that it is really happening. This is a big part of the reason why you have to be very clear with any man you are hitting on. He will need repeated, clear signals. Story 65. I'm a shirtless runner. There is really no other way to run here in Florida. And unless I am on the trails, I get catcalled quite regularly by both men and women. I think it is the harassment factor more than anything else. Comments have ranged from, "I love you," "nice body," and inappropriate proposals to throwing things at me. Some man offered advances openly. Honking happens all the time and I just wave back. Behavior is animalistic these days. Story 66. I remember when I was 20 and worked out a lot. I was muscular but still self-conscious. I was riding my mountain bike to the beach and was shirtless. I rode by a group of girls who whistled and yelled, "Work it." I had the biggest smile for a week. Story 67. I always felt good when it happens. But it is not a double standard because men threatening women is different from women catcalling men, which is not a threat to men. Story 68. Where were you? What was said? There is not enough information to go on. As a woman, my immediate thought is that it sounds statistically unlikely unless they were either prostitutes or a single group of overly forward drunk girls. Sometimes aggressive salespeople also engage in this way, so if they were working in a stand or kiosk, they may just have been looking for someone to flirt with to make a sale. Story 69. I was passing a bus stop, walking on the opposite side of the road on my way home when a group did it. It did not bother me, as I am not a woman who finds reasons to be angry at everything. I said thanks and went on my way. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.